Hey everybody, welcome to this special edition of the DFS Power Hour podcast. On this edition, we are actually going to do a Power Hour. Every 1 minute, we should have a question or some kind of stat that we're going to go over. After that minute's over, we're going to move on to the next topic unless something really good is happening, and we're going to keep going. But at every minute, we're going to take a shot of beer. That'll come out to something like 7 beers over this hour, and things are going to get interesting. Today, I'm drinking Steel Reserve to start. And Scott, what are you drinking?
Yeah, I'm drinking Corona Light in a can. Today's going to get sloppy. And it's a special pod when I'm letting Johnny do the intro. I'm super excited. I don't even know if this is going to go up on iTunes. Just might be too crazy, too weird. We're at a minute. All right, let's do our first shot. All right, we'll try not to let this interfere too much with the podcast. First things first, our rules of order for today. Today's podcast and my brand new table. No longer am I podcasting from an overturned garbage can. Today's podcast and this table are both brought to you by Rumford Johnny. I'm going to read to you his donation speech. Scott, a bucket is not a desk. You're not a sidewalk drummer, and you're not building a couch fort like a 6-year-old. Go buy a desk like a grown-ass man. Love the podcast. John sounds like fucking Guilfoyle from Silicon Valley. Thanks so much, Rummy. Rummy's the man. He made our logo. He's come on the show. He's like the godfather of this podcast. Definitely check him out on Twitter. I'm sure you know who he is. Got to do another shot. Also, check out his wife's website, Curious Nature Apothecary. If you're into stuff like natural body and bath oil and perfumes for your wife, mom, mail lady, whatever. Also, shout out to those of you who found our Easter egg in last week's show and gave us a hashtag banana hammock. That's Julie B. Ref for fun. That's her Twitter handle. Ben Gretsch, Scott Fish 24, TH3 What. Carl Safchek, Keen, Keen, Johnson 1, the number 1. Thanks, guys, for doing that. It's really cool that you guys stuck around and found that. If you don't know what we're talking about, stinks to be you. So we're going to do a power hour. And if you don't know what that is, we just do a shot of beer every minute. And we're going to be doing some stats and answering some fan questions. Got to do another shot. And, it's going to be fun. But first thing on the Darnell docket for today, Johnny wanted to talk about what a crazy day it was for some early round running backs.
Yeah, so the docket today, the Zeke news and the even bigger news, the Le'Veon Bell news, is just completely nuts. We went from D'Angelo Williams going in the 9, 10, 11th round as a strict handcuff to him now being talked about in the 5th or 6th round. And apparently everyone thinks that Le'Veon Bell is just completely cooked or something. Scott, where would, and this I guess is our first question of the day, where would you take D'Angelo Williams right now in an MFL 10?
I'm not super into him. He's still a backup. If you hear me pause, I'm probably just doing a shot. I heard Evan Silva and Sigmund Bloom saying today they take him the 5th. I think that's crazy early. We've talked in this show before about how much we love the Pittsburgh offense. Since joining the league, Le'Veon Bell has played 80% of the running back snaps, 77% of the running back carries, 82% of the running back targets in games he played. And then D'Angelo Williams had an even higher bell cow percentage. He did 94% of the running back snaps, 95% of the carries, and 100% of the targets in every game he started and finished. Really like bell cow monstrous numbers, but my issue is that he's just giving you 4 games. He's probably like 99% not going to start in the postseason or the other 10 games that are important to fantasy owners. Unless there's another injury to Bell or another suspension. So he just has no floor really, and the upside's really only for 4 games or hoping for an injury, which is the same as any other bell cow. And you can get a ton of high upside handcuffs, later on in the draft. What about you, Johnny?
And just to mention one of those high upside handcuffs to a bell cow, last year when Mark Ingram went down, Tim Hightower started 4 games. In those 4 games, he averaged 21 carries, 82 yards, 4 catches for 33 yards, and he averaged a touchdown per game, which was actually half a PPR point more than D'Angelo Williams averaged in his super hot 8-game stretch. So I think it's just something to be said that when a guy is given these really worthwhile roles, they're a worthwhile handcuff. But D'Angelo was really the only handcuff that anyone was giving any type of elevated draft position to. And it really didn't make sense that he was going so much earlier than the other handcuffs. So he was already going probably a few rounds earlier than he should have been. And now he's going to just be going. He's going to be going before guys who are, definitive starters. And I just think that's pretty nuts. I'm not taking him over Ryan Matthews or Jonathan Stewart or Melvin Gordon, any of those guys who seem to have definitive starting roles.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I like what you said about Hightower. Drawn, too, is another guy who did that. And it's something that you see quite often. Really, when I was doing my bell cow piece, you see like a lot of recurring backs like getting workhorse roles with like a high percentage of snaps, carries, and targets. It was like Andy Reid backs, Mike Tomlin backs, Matt Forte. But then you get all these like random scrub backups who just like the starters out and they come in for a week to 3 weeks and they get these monstrous workloads. And what it has to do with is like the running back depth is so depleted that coaches have no problem just giving the entire role to them. And so, yeah, you could take advantage of that. But targeting a backup over likely starters like Melvin Gordon and Amir Abdullah, it just doesn't make too much sense to me. Even Matt Jones, I've heard, who I dislike on talent, but the usage is definitely going to be there. And then I also wanted to talk about Zeke Elliott, but you're the lawyer, so why don't you kind of talk about the risks involved there?
So the Zeke stuff is like, the NFL doesn't operate in the the rules of the law. They operate. The terrifying thing in the NFL is the commissioner's exempt list. Like that is what everyone should be absolutely terrified of. And whether or not Zeke did it or didn't do it, if we find out, a week before the season starts that he's going to be investigated and possibly charged, then there's risk that he ends up on the commissioner's exempt list. If we find out next week that there's going to be no investigation, he's completely cleared and all of that, then he's perfectly fine. I mean, you look at Nelson Aguilar, who you don't want to say he lucked into this because it was a horrible thing, but it happened at a time where you're able to kind of reconcile that he's not going to end up on the commissioner's exempt list. You find out early enough. Where with Zeke, not sure if we're gonna figure that out or not in time to know that he's not going to get on the exempt list. And if he gets on the exempt list, then well, he's fucked.
Yeah, this is definitely a delicate topic, and we want to talk about how as if anyone would ever do that, that's really horrible, and like putting a fantasy slant on that, it just like never sits right. But yeah, I think Johnny summed it up well from a fantasy perspective. You do have to it is a serious risk. We saw what happened to Adrian Peterson and people who drafted him. So yeah, you definitely have to watch out for that and like keep your eye out and follow along with the story and see what's going on. All right, Johnny, did you want to get into some stats that you compiled and I compiled?
Let's start with the questions. Let's do the questions.
You don't want to save that for when we're good and hammered?
All right. All right. Let's start with stats then. Okay. So we put together, 30 or so stats, just interesting things that are fun. So I'll go ahead and give my first one. The highest yards per catch by a running back in 2015 was Travaris Cadet, who averaged 16.2 yards per reception, but he only had 9 catches. The second highest in that category was actually Matt Jones, who averaged 16 yards per reception. And you have everybody who loves to say, oh, he had that big catch, that was 78 yards. And so the thing is that if you take that catch out, he ends up having 12 yards per reception over the season. And Jeremy Langford, who also had a giant big reception, and if you leave his in, only averaged 12.7 yards per reception. So Jones minus his longest reception averaged about the same yards per catch as Jeremy Langford with his longest reception.
Yeah, that's super interesting, though. I do love yards per catch and yards per carry leaders on such small samples. For instance, Andre Ellington led the league in yards per carry last season. The interesting thing about Langford's, I think it was like one reception for like 86 yards and a touchdown. The interesting thing about that comprised over 10% of his total fantasy points, despite having 148 carries and 40 targets and 7 touchdowns. So I thought that was pretty crazy. He was pretty terrible kind of besides that, I think. But that's a cool stat. All right, I'll jump to one of mine. So a guy I dislike a lot, but definitely has value in an Adam Gase offense, but still I'm very hesitant, is Jordan Cameron, who's really made a career out of just 4 good games, 4 consecutive good weeks in 2013 in PPR leagues since week 5 of 2013. So 37 games total since then. Jordan Cameron has scored more than 12 fantasy points in a game just 4 times. And that's PPR.
Yeah, and Jordan Cameron is somebody that if anyone's been following Scott, they know that he absolutely hates him.
He's too pretty to be a tight end.
Yeah, it's one thing to be like pretty and good, but he's just pretty and not good. So Jordan Cameron's somebody who I'm not buying at all. I mean, they added Deontay Carew. They added Arian Foster. They have passing weapons, and I doubt Adam Gase really wants Ryan Tannehill leading the league in passes. So I don't know if there's going to be enough for Cameron to go around, even as the tight end there.
All right, next stat.
All right, so back to the Steelers. In Martavis Bryant's 5 absences, Darius Hayward-Bay averaged 5 targets, 3.4 catches, 42 yards, and he scored 2 touchdowns over those 5 weeks. Marcus Wheaton averaged 3.6 targets, 1.8 catches, and 46 yards over those 5 weeks, and he scored 1 touchdown. If they had been together, they would have actually been a viable wide receiver 2, fringe wide receiver 1. But instead, they both averaged 10 PPR points or less while Martavis Bryant was absent. So I want to wish everyone who's trying to hit the lottery there good luck with that.
All right, so I'll piggyback on that stat with a stat of my own. And that is, so everyone's freaking out that Martavis Bryant is leaving this offense. He's suspended this year. They're also trying to figure out if Sammy Coates is the guy. I know J.J. Zacharyason's been talking about Darius Hayward-Bay having a role, which I could definitely see too. But I think people are kind of neglecting Marcus Wheaton. And I'm not even like a Marcus Wheaton guy, but here's my stat. So after the Steelers bye week, in week 11, Marcus Wheaton was the wide receiver 16 in PPR leagues, while at the same time, Martavis Bryant was only wide receiver 35.
Another fun fact is that his name is actually Marcus Wheaton. I just think that whole offense is interesting because we really have it's such a mess when Bryant is not on the field to know who the hell is going to be catching the ball. And if I remember right,
5-game sample size.
Right. And if I remember right, a lot of Wheaton's production came from a couple long touchdowns.
Yeah.
I don't think he was very consistent. So, I think Ladarius Green is probably who I'm buying. Let's see another one. Scott's boy Justin Forsett. If we disregard the game,
my boy.
If we disregard the game where he got injured, 44% of his 2015 yardage came in 2 of his games. And he played in 9 healthy games. So 44% of his yards came in 22% of his games, which was actually the big reason that in Justin Forsett week last year, when he was the DFS play of the week, I did not use him because he was just not a central carry piece to that offense. And he only had 1 goal line touchdown last year.
Okay. My next stat is last season, Jared Cook dropped 10 of 69 targets for a drop rate of 20.4%. So for perspective, Davante Adams dropped 10 of 88 targets for a drop rate of 16.7%. So Jared Cook had worse hands than Davante Adams last year, and now he's joined the Packers.
And I just want to say that a lot of people are saying that Jared Cook is going to be adding something to this offense. And I mean, speed is not the only thing that matters. You have to be able to get open deep, and that's something that he's done occasionally. I think he has value in a best ball format, especially now that his price is depressed. But he's a guy that there is no chance in hell that I'm ever going to play in DFS outside of a big GPP.
Yeah, I can see that. You got any more stats?
Oh, yeah. So to bounce off my last one, after I crushed Justin Forsett's soul for a second, the starting running back for the Ravens last year, between Forsett and Buck Allen, even if we include the week that Buck was benched, would have combined to average 5.6 targets per game, which would have been good for 90 targets in the season, which would have been 4th in the league for running back targets, and it would have only been 7 less than Devonta Freeman. However, the major downside for the Ravens last year was that their starting backs only scored 3 rushing touchdowns on the season, and they only scored 2 of those from the goal line. And if I remember right, I think Flacco scored 2 goal line touchdowns himself. So that was a major problem.
All right, so I'll do another kind of thing similar to that. So if you take D'Angelo Williams and Le'Veon Bell, we just talked about how perfect that situation is, how we both love whoever the Pittsburgh starting running back is because of the kind of workload they get. But I found this like super mind-blowing. I can't get over it. If you combine D'Angelo Williams and Le'Veon Bell into one running back and took only the games from whichever one scored more points and just took those points and then added them together to create like one monster Pittsburgh running back, combine them together, you get 324.3 PPR points, but that's just 5.4 PPR points more than what Devonta Freeman had last year. And that was with Devonta Freeman missing a game because of a concussion, leaving one early in the second quarter, not being a starter for the first 2 weeks. Like I just think that's mind-blowing. I think people are kind of neglecting really how awesome Devonta Freeman's 2015 was.
Yep.
Although also, I'll say at the same time, because I just tweeted this out, Devonta Freeman's 243.4 fantasy points in standard leagues is the fewest of any overall number one overall fantasy running back since 1982. Though that is standard points, yeah.
What is standard?
Yeah,
Anyways. Yeah, I mean Freeman was so good. And that's why it's so interesting that the Ravens backs were essentially catching as many passes as he was. So, another stat here. Something that I was talking about today with Aaron Butler, RI Patriot. So Todd Gurley this is just kind of a weird one. He had a 4-week stretch last year. I think it was maybe his 3rd start of the season where he averaged 4 targets per game and things were looking up. But outside of that 4-week stretch, he only averaged about 1.1 targets per game. And that was the only stretch where he had more than 3 targets in a game. Other than that, he was not very targeted at all.
Yeah, so my issue with Gurley is that he's just a 2-down running back, and I don't want to take that in the first round. For instance, last year he played on only 9% of situations where the team was on offense and like third and more than 8 yards to go. So he only played at 9% of third and 8+ situations last year, while Latavius was at 78%. So he was just really completely a 2-down back, and he's too expensive for me in the first round. When David Johnson and Zeke, pre this news, Zeke was going after him.
Yep. And just to piggyback onto another 2-down running back who I think is probably undervalued. And this is a stat that I'm kind of stealing from Scott because, I don't have that sweet DFF access. But per Pro Football Focus, Melvin Gordon forced the 7th most missed tackles per touch last year. And that's something that I noticed when I watched him was that he wasn't terrible. He did sort of at times the best that he could do. He had terrible blocking, terrible situations where they're playing, from behind. And when they knew that he was on the field, he was going to be running the ball. But he wasn't as bad as everyone thinks. So
I can't believe you're going to throw a PFF stat in my face like that. All right, I got a missed tackles stat for you too. Golden Tate has led the league in missed tackles in each of the last 3 seasons. However, Jarvis Landry's 28 last season ranked 2nd most since 2008.
But he's not good, remember?
Yeah, that's what he's saying. Yeah, so I just want to talk about that real quick. He's not athletic. He's garbage. He's trash. Whatever. If he's such a terrible athlete, they would not play him on special teams. He would not be returning kicks and punts. That's all I have to say about that. And he wouldn't be good at it either, but he is.
A fucking dynamic returner.
All right. I don't know if I just gave a stat, but I'm going to give another one. All right. So in his career as a receiver, Drew Brees has caught 7 of 8 targets for 73 yards and a touchdown. And then Mohamed Sanu, as a passer, is 5 for 5 with 177 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a perfect 158.3 QBR.
Which is honestly why the Falcons signed him, because they need a new starting quarterback.
Right, Matt Ryan stinks.
Exactly, man. They're good to go. All right. So let's see. Another one here. So Josh McCown, who we all hope and pray becomes a starting quarterback somewhere, averaged 18.9 DraftKings points per game last year over the 8 games that he played. And the 2 quarterbacks who were just below him were Jameis Winston and Ryan Tannehill, who averaged 18.6 and 18.2. And Jameis Winston was throwing to Mike Evans and Austin Seferian-Jenkins. Ryan Tannehill was throwing to Landry and Devontae Parker for half the season. And Josh McCown was throwing to Brian Hartline, Travis Benjamin, and Gary Barnidge. So keep your eyes out for Josh McCown coming back.
Yeah, I mean, Hartline's great, though. So I don't know why you listed him in there as if he was a bad receiver. But, and Barnidge on a 16-game pace with McCown was the overall tight end 1 above Reed and Gronk on a points-per-game basis. And then the splits, if you look at them closely, Jordan Reed with Kirk Cousins versus Jordan Reed with RG3 was drastically even worse than how good Barnidge was with McCown. So I don't know. If it's RG3, I want no part of that passing game. If it's McCown, I'm super into Barnidge. I'm saying it right now. So stacking stats doesn't count as a stat. So I get to do 2 stats. So we were having fun with yards per carry before. This is like another fun thing I like to do a lot. Like I did it with CJ Anderson and Hellman a few episodes back. But Jeremy Hill had 69 more carries than Gio Bernard, but only 64 more rushing yards. And then Lamar Miller, who ranks first in yards per carry over the last 2 seasons among all running backs with 400 attempts. This same Lamar Miller had only one more carry, or had one fewer carry and only 9 more rushing yards than Rashad Jennings.
To go to bounce off of that and go into running backs. If we look at the rookie running backs of last year, ones who qualify, there were 10 running backs who had enough carries to qualify. I'm sure everybody knows who those 10 are. The highest percentage of attempts that went for 5 or more yards for these qualifying rookies went to Carlos Williams and Thomas Rawls, who both had 41% of their carries go for 5 or more yards, which if you look historically is really, really strong for a running back. And, everyone wants to count Rawls out, but in reality, he was so good last year, and so was Carlos Williams, but now Carlos is really fat.
Yeah, so I'm not the biggest Rawls fan. Like I'm more of a Robert Nozick fan personally, but he was fantastic last season. If you remove Thomas Rawls' top 3 longest runs, 69 yards, 30 yards, 23 yards, he still would have ranked first in yards per carry among all backs with a minimum of 125 carries. Also, last season, he had 12 carries of 15 or more yards. He had 15 carries of 15 or more yards, while Latavius Murray, on the other hand, had 12 carries of 15 more yards. The difference is Thomas Rawls had 3 more, but on 119 fewer attempts.
And the thing about Rawls that's really funny is that the excuse that we all or everyone gave Marshawn Lynch for sucking in the beginning of the season was just how awful their offensive line was. And so if we consider that to be true, then everything that Rawls did was behind an atrocious offensive line.
And more on Carlos Williams. Last season, he ranked first in rushing fantasy points per carry and first in receiving fantasy points per target, which is like really insanely hard to do.
And another stat that Scott listed on his, but I actually sent to him last year when we were playing DraftKings and considering Ryan Fitzpatrick for particular weeks.
Oh no!
Was that last year the rule of thumb was that you couldn't play Ryan Fitzpatrick when Bilal Powell didn't play, and the reason for that was that when Bilal Powell played more than 8 snaps, essentially that he was on the field and not hurt, Ryan Fitzpatrick averaged 24.95 points per game, as opposed to averaging 19.25 fantasy points per game when he didn't. And the Jets were 9-2 in games that Powell played, and only 1-4 in games when he did not play.
All right, so yeah, and everyone knows we're big Bilal Powell fans. I'll do another weird one that doesn't really have any like immediate fantasy impact. But last season, the Browns paid Dwayne Bowe $76,000 per play, while the Jets paid Brandon Marshall $8,300 per play.
And that was, I think, Scott's highest drafted MFL 10 wide receiver last year. So
this year that might be Brandon LaFell, like another terrible wide receiver who I just own so many shares of. Another weird stat like that, Leonte Carew, who is now on the Miami Dolphins, last season in week 1 of 2015, he ran just 4 routes in that entire game. He just ran 4 routes. And on those 4 routes, he was targeted 3 times. And on those 3 targets, he caught every single one of them for 129 yards and 3 touchdowns. That's crazy. That's like a perfect game for a wide receiver.
Now I'm confused. Is it not Bilal Powell?
I'm talking about Leonte Carew. What are you doing?
No, I know. Carl just tweeted me and says that apparently it's not Bilal Powell. Is it Bilal?
What?
I don't know. How do you pronounce it?
Oh God, this isn't Nuck Hopkins again, is it?
I don't know. I'm
All right, back to the stats.
Anyways, yeah. No. Let's move on. Let's move on to questions. What do you think? Let's do some questions.
If we have time left over, we'll go back to stats.
Yeah, we'll go back. We got a few more. Okay, so this first one is for Scott. This is like a real football question.
Good.
Describe your draft process. Do you work off a single list or do you work position by position? And do you use players as a trigger for when you make a move on a particular position?
So I caught like half of that, but yeah. So like what I do is like super interesting. Like MFL 10s, I don't really give a fuck. I just kind of like draft whoever is like in this range that I just kind of like pretty much know what ADP is now on MFL. But yeah, for like real live, like fast drafts, like, oh my God, I'm so into it. I have my own rankings now. So I just print out my own rankings and I like position by position, print those out. And then I print out the site's ADP and then I like just cross-reference them. And like, as the draft goes on, I just cross off each player on both lists. And then when it's my turn to draft, I just kind of like look at both and I just see like who's the glaring value. If there's not a glaring value, like I'll take the next guy up on my rankings. It also shows like who's fallen a lot by that site's ADP. Yeah, so I'll do that. But before I had my own rankings, I would use like PFF projections tailored to whatever that league scoring system was, or just something like that. Or I even go as crazy as like make a composite expert ranks where I take like guys I really respect in that arena, like Jeff Radcliffe and Mike Clay and Pat Thorman, and just like average those all out together to create like one awesome expert ranking. But yeah, I do my own now, and that's going to be on PFF in a couple of weeks. Fuck.
All right. Do I have to ask myself the next question, or are you going to help me?
No, I got it. If you could be one fruit or vegetable, which would you be and why?
All right,
this is from Russell Clay, by the way.
So I gave this some long thought, and I realized that I would be a watermelon because watermelons are so full of water, and most of the time on Twitter I'm completely full of shit. But in the end, like I'm a really, like a popular fruit, because every once in a while I put out the good stuff, even though I'm mostly just full of water.
Great. My non-PC response to that question was Peter Thiel or Stephen Hawking. All right, moving on. Hopefully no one gets that.
Yeah. So the next one is for you, Scott, and I guess for yeah. So the question is, why is our podcast not Game of Thrones related?
It's easy, because Game of Thrones is the worst.
Is that it?
It goes like this. It goes like Deadwood, The Wire, Sopranos, 6 Feet Under, Lucky Louie, like whatever. And then it goes all the way down, and then it's like Entourage episodes without Ari, and then Game of Thrones. I watched the first season. It was like super boring, and then like the one really hot girl got naked, and I was like, oh, good. I got everything I wanted, and then like the rest of the show sucks, so won't never watch it again. And I didn't.
So I just want all of our listeners to know that Scott doesn't speak for both of us. I still understand that Game of Thrones is the best show on television, and that Scott's just pretty awful. But
Rick and Morty is the best.
Another really good show on right now is Stranger Things. If anybody wants a new show to watch, good stuff. All right. So
yeah, next one. This is from Jen Ryan. Over under 11 touchdowns for Des Bryant.
If Zeke plays under, if Zeke is on the exempt list, then I'd probably have to go with the over. Where are you, Scott?
I think regardless of Zeke, I think Des is good. His last 3 seasons, he had 12 touchdowns, 13 touchdowns, and 16 touchdowns. So, like, I'm kind of like a value-based base drafter. I just look at like trends in recent seasons, and like if he did it the last 3 seasons, even with the excluding 2015, obviously with the injury, then and with a healthy Romo, I think he's a safe bet to do it again.
I mean, I mostly agree with you. I have Dez as my wide receiver 5 for anyone who cares about that. All right,
that's too high, but okay.
So, next question that I guess is for both of us. Who made the worst career choices? The guy who has a trash can for a desk, or the guy who is an attorney? And it's it's a really good question, and I'm not sure that we have a solid answer for that, because while I was in law school, when I would do work like in the bathroom, because like you had to find time to do like, work wherever you could find it, especially while I was studying for the bar, I did my work on an overturned trash can. So
yeah, I'd say the lawyer. I used to work at a law firm right after college. I wanted to be a lawyer. I was a philosophy major. I was studying for the LSATs. Yeah, and then I worked at the law firm, and like this dude like was wealthy, but he like worked like 68 hours a week. It was just insane. I'm like, ugh, I'm like far too lazy to ever do that. But Johnny works for his dad, so like he's good. Yeah. But if he was just a regular attorney, yeah, that would suck. Definitely garbage can, homeless person beats him.
All right. So a quick question, I guess, for both of us is fuck, marry, kill Nathan Powell, Mocker, and Julie the intern. Scott, you're first.
Okay. It was Nathan, Julie, and Mocker.
Yeah.
Okay. I would marry Nathan, and then I would fuck him. No. I'd marry Nathan, and then I would kill him, and then I'd fuck his corpse.
Oh. Yeah. See, I'm not even sure if I can answer this, since Julie the intern is actually Scott. So
yeah. Julie the intern is John in a wig and a dress. So no, she's actually a very sweet girl. She's a ton of fun. She like gets her humor. We'll send a picture of her eventually.
All right. So anyways, moving on. So
you're not gonna answer?
Dude, I can't. It's 3 guys. It's not it's a loaded question.
Dude, Julie's gonna be so pissed at you. But all right.
all right. Okay, I'm trying to grab another quick one here. Best places to pull data for research. I'm gonna go with Pro Football Reference.
Yeah, I mean, I'm PFF, so I get access to all those like dank stats that like NFL teams pay like crazy money for. So yeah, I'm just gonna keep going with that. Like even if they don't pay me anything, like oh, it's so great. Yeah, it's the best.
Very woke of you.
Oh, totally. All right, so I'll do one. So this is great. I thought this was an awesome question. So like for the 99%ers out there, like guys in work leagues, what are some draft do's and draft don'ts? Which is great because like honestly, like a ton of the people who watch the show are like fantasy insiders. So like this is for like the people out there who aren't as in the know. What's some advice you'd give them?
Yeah, and the biggest don't, the thing that I like always preach is like my biggest don't. Is like don't reach. Like don't have these guys that you are so attached to. Don't do that ever. Last year it was Amir Abdullah, who you saw in work leagues going like the 3rd or 4th round and stuff like that. Just like close your eyes for a minute and just don't be attached to anyone. Just take a step back when you're doing these types of leagues. Because I know when it's your work league or your home league, you want to have your boys. But if you want to win that league, you can't have your boys.
So yeah, here's what I'll say is like for the past like 4 years, ESPN, Yahoo, NFL.com, those sites have been garbage. Like their ADP just made absolutely no sense. Like Duke Johnson last year, even though he like didn't really return great value, it was like in the like 16th round, or it just made no sense. So like what I do is like I take ADP and I cross-reference it to like ADP on other sites that I respect, or like expert rankings, to find like blatant values. So like last year, like I would do a draft on like NFL.com and like Devonta Freeman was like a 15th round. I'm like, oh, that's so stupid. Like my data is showing that that's like 8 rounds later than what he should be. So I just do that like really quick on Excel and then like just like figure out by that like the guys to target. It's like so many dumb like work league drafters just go by like site ADP, but site ADP is terrible.
Yeah,
So
and to add to that, Roto World does an article or a couple articles every year on the ADPs that they think are bad. So those are good to read if you're somebody who's just like not completely enveloped in it. And if you have any type of Excel skills or anything, grab a few experts that you really like and take their ADP and just average them out. You know, grab Evan Silva, Mike Clay, whoever you follow, who you think is a good expert and you like their advice. You know? Yeah, if he'll ever release his rankings, and just average them together, you know, and come up with those. Or take an expert who you really, really like and just change it. Print it out. Say, who do I disagree with this guy on? And change those players around, move them around, and then draft based on that. Just don't be attached to don't come to your home league with an ESPN printout. Just get rid of that shit.
All right. So my next question is for you, John, and that is what is the ideal Wout to Proctor talking ratio on the show, and what is the actual ratio?
I just want to say that
hold on. Let me just interrupt you. I'm sorry. I just wanted to say the ideal Wout to Proctor talking ratio is like, honestly, like I'm a very fair guy, so I'd say like probably 50-50. But like in my mentions all time, people are just like, yo, we love Johnny. Just like let Johnny like take over the show. Let him like talk like way more than he like does. Because like the current ratio, to be like completely honest, is like 25 him, 75 me. And I'm the Woat, by the way, apparently. But yeah. But I just love me some me, so I'm just gonna take all the time talking. All right, next question.
That's definitely why Scott was like, "Hey, John, like do the intro today because we have this question, and I want to not look like an asshole." But no, for the most part, over the last few weeks, you know, people have asked me like, "Hey, why don't you have a whole lot to contribute?" And it's because we've had on some like really, really awesome guests. And I really just wanted to like give them the floor. So when we get into the DFS season and I like really have some hot takes, you know, if I was on a podcast in 2015 and I told you to fade Calvin against New Orleans, never play Justin Forsett in DFS, things like that. So I'm gonna bring the heat when we start the DFS pods this year. Don't worry.
Yeah, no, I wanted to say that too. In redraft, like I'm convinced like I'm the shit and I'm like better than everyone. In DFS, Johnny is like the only person really out there that I tip my hat to that I think is like legit better than me. He's just fucking awesome. He was just right on all of his calls. We made so much money together, and like once it's DFS, like Johnny's gonna do most of the talking like he did last year. It just wasn't out on iTunes, so not too many people remember it. But yeah, no, Johnny's gonna steal the show in DFS, and I can't wait.
It's going to be fun, guys. And just to piggyback on that, we had a question. Are we going to cover FanDuel last year or this year? Because last year we mostly only covered DraftKings. And the answer is yes.
No! Really?
We're going to cover both.
Oh, God.
Because the truth of the matter is that FanDuel is as much as DraftKings is probably the better format, FanDuel has more players and more people are playing on FanDuel. And if I can say, if you can deal with having to pick a bullshit kicker, FanDuel is probably the easier site to play on because there are better players on DraftKings.
And by the way, I will say picking a kicker is fairly easy. Shout out to Brian Malone. Not a lot of people realize this, but there's a huge correlation between kicker fantasy points and Vegas spread.
Yep.
More so than over/under by like a lot. But like the higher a team is favorited, the more you should target their kicker because they're going to explode for fantasy points. It just has to do with like game script and things like that. Like teams from behind like tend to like go for it more on fourth downs and whatever. But yeah. So like that actually is exploitable, but not a lot of people realize it. They just like get annoyed by it.
So what Scott's really saying is yes, we're going to have FanDuel kicker advice. I'm just kidding.
I'm not happy about it.
We're not going to do that. We're not going to do that.
Johnny's going to lead FanDuel. I'm going to probably lead more DraftKings, but Johnny's probably going to do both.
Yeah, and so the one thing that FanDuel does offer that DraftKings kind of doesn't offer is sharper quarterback pricing. And I think you get a little bit of an advantage when it comes to picking quarterbacks when the pricing is a little sharper. So hopefully this year DraftKings corrects that. Last year, towards the end of the season, the last maybe 5 or 6 weeks, there were maybe 10 or 11 quarterbacks who were minimum priced or under 6,000 on DraftKings that were probably – they shouldn't have been the same price. So we'll see on that. But yeah, we will be covering DraftKings and FanDuel as much as Scott doesn't want to.
All right, next question. Could 2 QB work in DFS? Yeah, Fantasy Feud does that, and it's like super exploitable. Last year, I just like took the 2 cheapest quarterbacks and then like bulked up at the rest of the positions and like doubled up my money for like 7 straight weeks, and then lost it all because I was done with bankroll. But yeah, it's super exploitable. And
Fantasy Aces, they also do it. Another smaller site. Yeah. Both are good sites that are recommended, who have been in the game for a while and who haven't had any issues. So if you're looking for 2 QBs, there it is. And I just want to say, rest in peace, Draft Street. Still have a shirt laying around somewhere. Anyways, moving on. Okay, so a dynasty question. Do you aim to grab the best current players and trade away your future picks? Or do you draft young players and hope? So essentially, is your name anyone else, or is your name Russell Clay?
No. Are you Jacob Rickroad, or are you Russell Clay? I think
that's a good one. That's true.
Yeah, it's like, do you load up on just like the best veterans and just try and win now, or do you like play for the future? Yeah, I disagree with like both those strategies. Really, kind of. I think that's like, I mean, Jacob's the man. He's brilliant, and like it works for him in high stakes leagues. But like high stakes leagues are less exploitable or more exploitable than like the expert dyno leagues that I'm in. So I guess it depends on like who your opponents are. Like I'm not going to draft like Rashad Perriman over Brandon Marshall or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I care about both. I want good young players. I mean, I'm going to roster them for a really long time. So yeah, but I just draft the best player, but I do factor in age. What about you, Johnny?
Yeah, I would agree with you, man. And I think it depends a lot on especially if you're a few years into a league, what roster do you have at this point in time? So if you have a win now roster, then, trade your shit away. And
yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And win. But
because winning once could pay for like 7 years of league dues or whatever. Right. Yeah.
But if it's like a dynasty startup, I think a good balance is probably best. I mean, you don't want to just fill your roster with old players and be the guy who like tanks the league, because that's just not fun, and then you're just the asshole. So I think a good balance is probably best, for sure. All right. So next question. Is Frank Gore undervalued? People notice that Scott and I I'm big on Melvin Gordon. Scott's big on Ryan Matthews. But is Gore a better value than the two of them at their current ADP? I would say they're probably – Ryan Matthews is probably way better than both of them. And I would say Gore and Gordon are probably in similar categories in the sense of their current value for where they should be going.
So I wrote about this recently, and I wrote about Frank Gore last year because I like just absolutely loved him. I thought he was like such an obvious and blatant steal, and maybe he would have if Andrew Luck was healthy. But yeah, so like pretty much like Frank Gore last year scored 4.6 more fantasy points per game in victories as opposed to losses, and like that's important because like the 2015 Colts stunk with an injured Andrew Luck, but they were great in 2014. They had 3 more victories in 2014 than they did 2015. 57 more points. Hold on. Last season, he ranked 8th in red zone carries, but the Colts only had 46 red zone drives. But in 2014, they had 60 red zone drives. So I think, he's going to score a lot more touchdowns this year.
I'm with you for the most part. I don't know. I just old players.
In basketball, he's like so safe. Like if he plays every game, he's just gonna like solidly like weasel his way into like the top 15 again, like he's done every year.
I just want to remind everyone who says that he's really old is D'Angelo Williams is older. Just throwing that out there.
Debo probably has less mileage though.
Yeah, well, they both have tons of it.
Yeah.
Anyways, so is Sam Bradford a crazy steal where he's going? I guess that also plays into other quarterbacks with little job security. For MFL 10s, I'm not taking quarterbacks who don't have job security.
Yeah, I mean, PFF liked him a lot. Said he was like he had a actually pretty good year last year considering like his supporting cast. But at the same time, I mean, like at any time, one of the other 2 quarterbacks, the one they paid a ton of money to, or the one they drafted in the first 2 picks, could definitely like overtake the job. And I don't want that in a best ball league. I'd be more excited about like Gabbard or Fitzpatrick for sure. I mean, it could be a steal, but it's just a little too much risk for me at the moment.
Yeah, I'm taking Jared Goff before I take Sam Bradford.
Mm-hmm. Me too, and I hate the Rams quarterback.
Yeah, but he has. We know that Goff is going to play. I mean, we should know that Goff is going to play 16 games. So
yeah, agreed.
You have that.
Next question, Johnny. What kind of cases are you working on? Like law? Are you allowed to talk about that or no?
Yeah. All right. So I guess. So I do workers' comp law is like 90% of what I do. So it's injured workers, people who are injured on the job. Maybe 10 or 15% of our cases are just normal personal injury cases. You know, people who are injured in car accidents, slip and falls, things like that. You know, people who spill coffee on themselves. If you think that case was stupid, by the way, just look up the pictures. But anyways, so most of what I do is workers' comp. So it's injured workers. We represent the injured workers who are trying to get payment for medical bills and time off of work. That's probably, we have, it's the majority of our practice, probably maybe 600 or 700 of those clients.
Wow, that's boring. So anyway,
yeah, man.
Is taking 2 tight ends early in MFL 10s ever justified? I did just for fun, but does it really make sense?
Yeah. Okay. So this one, I think this one is like with MFL 10s. I think there's like you should never go because last year one of the big things that people were really fucking up with MFL 10s was they went in with this set strategy of like I'm gonna have this many running backs, this many tight ends by this round and stuff. You can't do that. So if two tight ends who are elite fall where they shouldn't be falling, then you should be taking them because then you're going to just completely cover your tight end position and you can ignore it from that point. So, you end up with Jordan Reed in the 5th and Delaney Walker in the 8th. Then you're done. I mean, but how early is early? Would I take Gronk in the 1st and Jordan Reed in the 4th? No way. I don't think I would do that. I mean, you got to make sure you have elite players at the important positions like running back and wide receiver versus completely covering the tight end position.
So every time I take Gronk, I take only 2 tight ends, and that's like one of the biggest benefits about drafting Gronk is you save that extra roster spot for somewhere else because like Gronk was a tight end 1 on over 80% of his games, and he just killed it. Honestly, like if I'll take Fleener and Eifert, I'm good. Like that's it. And then I save that extra roster spot, which gives me like added points elsewhere. Yeah, we talked about this with Rummy. We talked about this with TJ. Yeah, I'm definitely a fan of that. I think maybe 40% of my team's our 2 tight end, but they always have like really like tight ends I feel really comfortable about. Next up, will Denver have a viable fantasy football tight end this year? And if so, Virgil or Jeff? I mean, it could. Like, I've taken Jeff and Heuerman in the late rounds of some leagues. Virgil, I'm not that in on. I just think it's clear that they just like him as a blocking tight end. I think they're going to run a shit ton this year with the added fullback and the QBX system. So I'm not into Virgil at all, but like I'll take a flyer on Jeff in like the last round of an MFL 10 if I'm tight end needy.
For me, it's like I'm taking Lance Kendricks before I take Jeff Heuerman or how.
Yeah, no, I like Jeff more than him, and I think it's like honestly still close between him and Vance.
If you think Jeff Heuerman and Vance McDonald are close?
Yeah.
Oh man. I don't know. I don't
know if Vance wins that job. I think Jeff easily wins this job, and beat writers have agreed since February.
I probably agree with you that he probably wins that job. I just don't think the tight end job that in Denver this year is actually going to be valuable. They have 2 elite wide receivers who I think are going to eat up the majority of their targets. So I'm not.
The QBX tight end that's not attractive.
It's not that like I care who's gonna. It's not that like I'm concerned about someone not winning the job in Denver. It's just that I don't care who does. The talk is that they're gonna throw the ball less. So if they throw the ball less, then the odd man out is the tight end for sure. Because it's not Sanders or Demarius who are gonna lose targets to Jeff Heuerman or Heuerman, or we don't even know how to pronounce the guy's name, let alone how many targets he's going to get this year. Or Virgil Green, who has just been insignificant for forever. So I'm not investing in the Denver tight end. I guess me and Scott are on different pages on that one.
All right, I have a question for the people watching right now. Who is drunker, me or Johnny? And then you can ask a question, Johnny.
That's fair. All right. So the question for Scott, and this came from Graham Barfield, is why do you hate good wide receivers?
I hate not good wide receivers, and I like good wide receivers. We probably just disagree on who those are, but I do actually kind of hate wide receivers as a whole. Like I'm a big cornerbacks fan. I just grew up loving Jason Sehorn, and I met him in person once, and he had a leather jacket and a really hot wife. He was just super nice to me, and he signed my Ron Dane jersey for some reason. He was just a man, and I just I've always loved cornerbacks ever since. I just feel like wide receivers are cocky and shitty. Ugh. Yeah, but no, that's why I do my wide receiver versus cornerback matchups. I love cornerbacks, hate wide receivers. But I do like good ones, yeah.
I think what he really meant is why do you hate Mike Evans?
Because he's terrible.
Oh, there it is. Yeah, I'm not a big fan either. But all right, so let's move on to a next one. All right, let's see. What do we got here? So which players received the most offseason hate that you think will perform well? So I'll go ahead and first and just say Melvin Gordon. Scott, who do you have?
Yeah, so can you let me pull it up? Because I wrote something on Austin Seferian-Jenkins. And
yeah. All right.
Yeah, can you finish Graham's? Because I know you had more than one question.
So Graham said, do you have #plotter fetish on Google Alerts?
Yeah, I don't need a Google alert because my spidey sense starts tingling, if you know what I mean, every time I hear someone talking about plotters.
What Scott really means is he doesn't know what Google Alerts are.
I really don't. Yeah, I have no idea.
All right, so the next one is, do we Pokemon Go, or is that a nah wave?
So Pokemon Go or Pokemon No?
Pretty much. Yeah, there you go. That's a good phrase.
Yeah, dude, I'm obsessed with Pokemon in general. I've like written about it in like 3 of my articles. Of course, I'm playing Pokemon Go. I got TJ Calkins like obsessed with it. I've had more success meeting chicks with Pokemon Go than I have with Tinder.
That's not true.
I do it. Yeah, it's the best, man. I'm way into it. So yeah, definitely Pokemon Go all the way.
Yeah, so for me, I played Pokemon Go for maybe like 3 days, and it was like, this is interesting, and then it was like, this is actually not that fun. So then I decided to pull out the old 3DS that I got Pokemon Red for $5, and I was playing Pokemon Red, and it was actually about 11 times more fun than Pokemon Go. So that's what I've been doing instead.
All right, so the guy I'm on that everyone else is not on is Austin Safarian-Jenkins, and here's why. Greg Allman of the Tampa Bay Times recently went on a podcast with Ben Gretsch, who I definitely follow him. He's an editor with RotoViz. He's really smart. Check that out. But so he talked about how they run multiple tight end sets fairly often. He talked about how his competition is Cameron Brate, who's an undrafted tight end in his 3rd year, who was cut by the Buccaneers just last summer. Meanwhile, ASJ was taken the 6th overall pick in the 2nd round of the draft 2 years ago. That's like some really high draft capital with the same GM. And in the week prior to being removed from practice, Dirk Hoder said he envisioned a similar role to ASJ as to how he used Tony Gonzalez during his time in Atlanta. So like the thing is, like, he got kicked off of practice. Oh my God, that's horrible, because he didn't know what he was doing. But like okay, like imagine his potential if he like committed himself to the playbook and like really knew what he was doing in his 2nd season in the offense this year. He was a small sample size superstar. He ranked 1st among tight ends in fantasy points per snap, 2nd in fantasy points per route run, 2nd in yards per route run, 4th in fantasy points per catchable target. He was tied with Rob Gronkowski for the 3rd highest ADOT, average depth of target. His quarterback, Jameis Winston, during his 2 seasons at Florida State, targeted his tight end, Nick O'Leary, more than any other quarterback. He led the league in receptions and receiving yards over those 2 seasons. He's the 20th tight end being drafted off the board in MFL 10s. It makes absolutely no sense. This is just like typical like July nonsense where people overreact. Yeah, dude, load up on him. He's going to be heavily targeted. Braid is a nobody. ASJ is like hyper talented with a ton of draft capital behind him. I'll just do like 3 shots after this, but like, yeah, I'm way into ASJ and fuck the haters.
Yeah, I'm buying ASJ. Although I will say that as I'm looking him up last year, and I find that he was like super sweet and limited sample, and then I played him in DFS, he was like a total turd. So we'll see.
Yeah, every time.
So Scott, your take on Week 1, Antonio Brown versus Norman this year?
This is exactly like the kind of question I love and was looking for. So like, this is like a common like CB versus wide receiver DFS thing. Like, you guys know, me and Johnny both wrote a ton of articles about it last year. Yeah, I mean, in GPP, I guess you can do that, but it's like Week 1, so I really don't think he's going to be like super undervalued. Like wide receivers are sometimes, like Julio Jones was that one time he faced Norman. But yeah, dude, I have the stats. I just don't feel like pulling it up. I'm too drunk at this point. But Norman shut down literally everyone. Julio Jones had 1 good game, but guess what? In his like 4 other games, Norman completely shut him down. I mean, Antonio Brown's a monster, and you saw last year he beat out Chris Harris, who was like another like really awesome shutdown corner. You could play him in cash, but the thing is, like, his salary is going to be so high that it's probably not worth it. In a GPP, maybe, but with that super high salary, you need to have like a really low ownership. And I just don't see that happening in Week 1 where all the fish play and all the fish like load up on the top wide receivers. So he's probably a fade Week 1. What do you think, Johnny?
I think, yeah, Week 1, you look at like the Falcons are playing the Bucks, who were like super targetable last year. The Browns are playing the Eagles, who were super targetable the last a million years. So you have these teams that are playing these worse secondaries that you're probably going to look to, that I'm probably going to target more so than just spending up on especially the Redskins, who were like a bad rushing defense last year. I'm probably not going to spend up on Antonio Brown against Odell Beckham, especially because the Steelers are a team that loves to run in the red zone. So that's like a big
Odell
negative.
Beckham?
What?
Against Josh Norman, you mean? I think you said against Odell Beckham.
Oh yeah, I'm just thinking of OBJ and the feud today. That was good stuff. No, yeah. So against Norman, I mean, Brown is like untouchable when it comes to corners mostly, but it's just when you're paying up, it's a different story. When you're going to pay, would I pay the premium for Brown, or would I pay the premium for Julio when I get to play him against the Bucs? And I think it's probably going to be Julio who would be who I would target. And at the same time, I don't know who I'm targeting because we don't necessarily know the pricing, but we know who are going to be the top two price wide receivers, and those are going to be the two. And the third highest price, or the third person in that conversation for the highest price, is going to be Beckham, who's playing against the Cowboys, who also have atrocious cornerbacks. So it'll be an interesting week one for sure.
So yeah, we're at like a minute 6, and I think we're done with all our questions. Do you want to like end this on time for the first time, or you want to just like go back to some stats?
We have one more question though. Okay, we actually have 2 more questions from TJ Hernandez. Favorite bourbon?
Oh, yeah. I feel so strongly about this, and that is. Wait, by the way, did the Power Hour officially conclude?
Well,
it's a minute 6 according to my watch.
My counter says 6 more, but.
Oh, all right. Yeah, I don't know. My clock is on like 40 seconds, I guess. I
might have started it late.
That's okay. Yeah, I'll keep drinking because it's fun. Yeah, I feel really strongly about this. My favorite bourbon is Elijah Craig. It's like cheap, and I like second favorite is yeah, Elijah Craig. It's like really good. It's cheaper than JMO, which is also awesome. But it's just like it tastes awesome, and it's like such like an obvious value. It's like getting like OBJ priced as like the number 14 wide receiver for some reason. So it's like, and I had a garbage can for a desk recently. So yeah, like price is important. So it's like super cheap, but it's like also delicious. Like in my opinion, the most delicious bourbon out there, better than Maker's Mark, whatever. And like the name is awesome. You just be like Elijah Craig. Just I don't know. I just like imagine some like Southern like lawyer with overalls, just like now, Miss Roark here. The prosecution thinks the defense is, and so like, yeah, it's just the best. Yeah, I'm a big fan.
Anyways, so I'm a big fan of Bullet.
Yeah, Bullet's great too. It's a little more expensive.
Anyways, so and then the last question we had was how do you build your player price estimation models? And the honest truth is that I don't build any models because I think people get way too caught up in models for the NFL. And with baseball and basketball, I think models are really, really, really good. But I think with NFL, a lot of it, and it sounds dumb, but a lot of it is kind of like, is this guy going to get targets, or is this guy in a bad spot? And I don't know if models are really going to tell you that because they're only throwing you the numbers. You look at like a Justin Forsett and the numbers look good, and then you really look deeper and you see that he had all of his production in like 1 or 2 games. So I think you need to be really, really careful with models because NFL is such a small sample size. We only have 16 weeks. So we need to really look closely at each week that we're investigating and not give it too much weight. And it's really hard to give a model too little weight because it's doing it all for you. So for me, I start by doing everything by hand. I take a legal notepad. I write down all the relevant players for the week. So I take each game, I write it down, write down the players who I think would be possibly relevant, write down the Vegas numbers, the Vegas totals, and then I give players pluses or minuses based on, are they playing a good cornerback? Is it a low Vegas total? Things like that. And then there are players I'll cross out. So then I start with a model. I start with a spreadsheet that has removed players who I think are non-existent. And I give boosts to players who I've given bonuses to originally by hand. So it sounds really, really old school, but I think a lot of it you need to do that way in the first place beforehand. I don't know. How do you feel, Scott?
Yeah, I mean, I like that. I don't know. I don't really have a set thing, but yeah, that sounds good enough. Yeah.
All right. So you want to move on to the last couple stats we've got on the list?
I mean, I think we have a ton of stats, but yeah, we can just dick around for the next few. I'm already drunk and it's 11 o'clock, so I'm not gonna go pick up chicks at a bar or something. So why not? Yeah, you already ruined my Friday, John. Yeah. So here's something I think I'm gonna write an article about. Is like the Seattle offense. I think is like poised to like take over as like one of the next New England Patriots, maybe like it's like one of the premier offenses you need to target, or it could just be like the Seattle offense of old, where like hyper efficiency, slow pace, not too many targets, which like sucks. But yeah, so it's one or the other. Like there really could be a season winner. So over the last 4 seasons, Russell Wilson is ranked second, fourth, and third in QB fantasy points per dropback. Last season, among all wide receivers, Doug Baldwin ranked first in fantasy points per target. Tyler Lockett ranked fourth in fantasy points per target. And Jermaine Kearse ranked 7th in fantasy points per target. That's 3 wide receivers in the top 7. That's insane. So here's the thing. It's like people don't realize, like, if Seattle improves its pace even just like a little bit, they're gonna take over all of fantasy. Like, it's insane. So Seattle, and like there's reason for optimism. So last season, Seattle averaged more than 4 plays per game over the second half of last season. That's not that crazy, but it kind of is when you realize that they were leading by 4 or more points for 76 plays more per game than they were in the first half of the season. So like, despite having awesome game script, they jacked up the pace. And their offense really just like clicked because of it. Yeah, so I think it's like it could be one of the top offenses to target, but there definitely is risk there. So I get that too.
Dude, that's the thing is like, if Rawls keeps going with like the price that people are giving him, he's like a 5th round pick right now, and I'm buying because like you want those goal line touchdowns in MFL 10s. You want those goal line touchdowns, and like he's the guy right now. I think. Yeah,
the injury is like a huge concern, but he was really, really like fantastic last year. Like one of the best running backs on a per touch basis.
And obviously the top priority is Russell Wilson, who's going in like the 7th. Yeah,
round. And he runs too, which is just like so cheap. So like, but if you want to talk quarterbacks, we can talk about how amazing Cam was last year, although no one like seems to realize it. Like everyone's like, oh, Cam was the QB1, but like he's due for regression because blah blah blah. Yeah, like okay, like every top scorer at their position is due for regression. Like, of course they are. Like Nuck is due for regression, or Nuke, whatever. Like Antonio Brown is probably due for regression. Julio Jones, OBJ, the dude in the Jaguars, whatever. But if you take away 13 passing touchdowns from Cam Newton last year, he'd still be the overall number 1 fantasy QB. And then if you take 7 passing touchdowns away from him, he'd be tied with Luck's 2014 in total fantasy points. He had like an insane year, and then even if you like put in regression, factor that in, like he's still like easily probably the guy you should think is the top quarterback.
But is Kelvin Benjamin going to help that?
No, we talked about this. Like the offense was so much better with like a rookie Funchess who sucked for the first half. Ted Ginn, who like has one of the worst drop rates in like the history of the game. Yeah, I mean, no, maybe he will, like honestly, but I don't see him coming close to what he did 2 years ago, and I think the offense is going to be better off because of it. But still on quarterbacks, the last time Drew Brees finished outside of the top 5 fantasy quarterbacks on a points per game basis was 2010. When he finished 6th. And the last time Tony Romo finished worse than a top 12 QB or a QB1 on a points per game basis was 2006, 10 years ago, his first season as a starter. And you guys know, like I'm like the Warren Buffett of like fantasy drafters, where like, oh, just like that's like a PE ratio that's just gold. We're like, okay, he's done it this many times, like chances are he's probably going to do it again. So yeah, I think Romo is a blatant value. I think so is Ingram. Johnny, next out is you.
All right, I'm gonna see which one of these I even like. All right, so James White stat here. I can't do that. So yeah, Matt. So Matt Jones. Okay, to give a negative for him. In 2015, 26.4% of Matt Jones' rushing attempts went for no gain or negative yards, ranked 3rd worst behind Joik and Andre Williams. So I think there's a lot of talk about how the Redskins are going to be the pass heaviest team in the league, and so if they are the pass heaviest team in the league, that's a positive for Matt Jones. He was much, much better in the passing game than he was in the rushing game. So I think the hate for him has gone a little too far when it comes to the passing game. But I will say that he had some really, really bad games in the rushing game for sure.
All right. Hugh Jackson. So I found this stat and I was like so proud of myself, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna load up on Isaiah Crowell. Like, what a blatant value. And then I just like kind of dug into like the game script behind it, and then I was like, never mind, like Duke Johnson all the way. But so this is a stat. Over Hugh Jackson's last 4 seasons as an offensive coordinator or a head coach with Cincinnati or Oakland, he has never not ranked top 7 in rushing attempts or rushing touchdowns.
And I think that's probably a positive for Crow and Duke.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
I don't know. That is like the toughest situation, I think, to just like figure out. And the only thing that's really, really positive there is that Crowell is so cheap. But as for which one is the guy and who is Hugh going to be using, is Josh Gordon going to be back? I don't know. Those are all, who knows.
All right. T.Y. Hilton. So like everyone's in on Dante Moncrief this year, and like, okay, maybe. But so last year only 58% of T.Y. Hilton's targets were deemed catchable by PFF last season, the lowest rate among all wide receivers. In 2014, with a healthy Andrew Luck, 71% of Hilton's targets were deemed catchable. So like that's the difference from Hasselbeck to Andrew Luck. You get more catchable targets, and you get like deeper targets. Like Hasselbeck had no arm last season, so I'm expecting T.Y. Hilton's like fantasy value to skyrocket, even if Dante Moncrief does have as good of a year as everyone's saying.
Yeah, I mean, I'm buying Hilton. I
Yeah.
don't know on Moncrief yet. You have some beat writers saying they think Moncrief is going to lead the team in targets. So I don't know.
I mean, he could. He seems like more the PPR back, where like PPR wide receiver, while Hilton's the deep threat.
Right.
But I don't think there's any way Moncrief outscores Hilton on a fantasy points per game basis.
Yeah, it's a really interesting spot. I mean, it seems like they could both possibly beat their ADP, like in an Emmanuel Sanders, Demaryius Thomas type situation.
Yeah.
You threw on here Antonio Brown's 248 PPR points were the second half of last season is the most wide receivers ever scored in his final 8 games. I mean, I don't know how much more can be said about just like how amazing he was when Ben was on the field. So I mean,
yeah,
when AB is playing and Ben is playing, it's nuts, and that's why week 1 is just like so confusing because he plays Norman, Julio plays the Bucks. What do you do? I don't know. We'll see.
But yeah, so it was like literally the best second half of all time. So yeah, I mean, Antonio Brown's a monster and like clearly the 101. I'll have that argument with anyone. He's the 101. So another stat is so this stat has been like retweeted a bunch of times and like made it on some like high profile podcasts. But since 2001, of the 92 cases of a running back amassing 260 carries and 35 receptions in a season, which is like slightly less than what Latavius Murray had last season. Latavius Murray's 2015 ranks dead last in fantasy points scored. So like of these 92 running backs, he ranked dead last. And it just like goes to show you like he had like such a Fortean workload last season and just like stunk it up. It's like a big reason why I'm all over Dwayne Washington. I had another stat earlier about Thomas Rawls like destroying him in on like a like explosive runs, like 15 yards or more per carry, just like utterly destroying him. Latavius just stinks. Like from a stats based perspective, I can make an argument why he stinks and like really easily, and then I just like watch him on tape and he just like stinks. So yeah, I'm all over Dwayne Washington, and I've mentioned a few times on this podcast, like Jack Del Rio's affinity for a workhorse back. I have it in my bell cow running back article we talked about before. Yeah, I just like kind of hate Latavius. I like Dwayne Washington a lot. Or DeAndre Washington? Am I drunk?
Yeah, I'm probably DeAndre drunk. Washington.
There you go. Dwayne Washington is the dude on the
Lions. Yeah, don't draft him.
yeah. Sorry about that, guys. Yeah, don't draft him.
I mean, what is your thoughts on like DeAndre Washington being like really, really small?
Yeah, I don't care. He's like thick, and he had a workhorse workload in college, so I think he can handle it. So I don't care. Like Ray Rice is super tiny, whatever.
Fair enough.
Darren Sproles is super tiny.
We got anything else? I feel like we might have covered the important stuff.
Yeah, we just have like a James White stat and a Greg Roman stat. I don't know if you want to end right here. And a Julian Edelman special team stat.
It's your call, man.
I'll give that one because I just shot it out. Julian Edelman ranks 7th all time in career yards per punt return. I like tweeted it out like 2 months ago and like 0 favorites, 0 retweets. I just thought it was interesting. Like, like this like unathletic white guy, slot receiver who so he kills it on special teams. So good for him.
All right. So we got a question. We might as well end with a question. How about the Oakland against New Orleans game, because apparently I can't pronounce things. And the Green Bay game against the Jacksonville game for week 1 DFS. I mean, I last year I think the Saints were given like this God mode thing that wasn't actually quite as God mode as it was. And Jacksonville, what did they spend the first 4 or 5 picks in defense? They had some players suspended and injured last year. I don't think the Jacksonville defense is going to be as bad as they were last year. I don't know. What do you think, Scott, about Jacksonville?
I mean, I agree with that, but I also don't think they're going to be as amazing as everyone's saying.
No, for sure. No way.
A lot of guys with like 0 career snaps and like serious injuries over the past 2 seasons, apparently coming together and gelling to be a top 5 defense. No, right. Get the fuck out.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not going to happen. Though I do love the Prince of Mukamura signing. I really think that like he was one of he was probably like the bet like for per dollar the best signing that like anyone made this offseason. I mean, they're going to be good. They're going to be much better. They're going to be above average probably. They're not going to be elite, like top 10, and they're not going to like take too many fantasy points away from like Bortles and the receivers.
But at the same time, like I think their D-line is probably going to be elite. I mean, they were elite for a period of time last year.
Yeah, they had a good pass rush, yeah.
They had some injuries roll up. They had a good D-line. They stopped the run. They were an elite run defense for a while. I think Eddie Lacy will probably be a popular pick week 1, and I'm not touching him week 1. But I think the passing game, I think Rodgers is probably going to be a guy who I don't know if he's contrarian or he's going to be popular, but he's going to be like a huge bounce back candidate for DFS people in the first few weeks because he was so disappointing last year. And he's going to be the normal Rodgers now that he has Jordy Nelson and Randall Cobb is back, hopefully back to not being terrible.
Yeah. So I just tweeted out a bunch of stats on like why Aaron Rodgers is like from a stats-based perspective is like obviously blatantly easily the greatest quarterback of all time, and like of course that has to do with like rule changes and like things like that, but like he's just like so easily the GOAT from a stats based perspective. If anyone want to make that, but yeah, and like,
it'll be interesting though, like where he's priced week 1, like if he's
I don't know, like that's a tough thing. Like I could see him being priced lower than Luck and lower than Cam for sure. Maybe lower than Russ. I don't know.
The big one is like is kind of I think Breeze maybe. I mean Breeze plays the Raiders, so are you? I mean, how cheap is Breeze going to be? It'll be week 1 is going to be really interesting because then you also have Kirk Cousins playing the Steelers with all of his players healthy. For how often are we going to have Kirk Cousins' whole offense healthy? The Steelers are terrible in the secondary. We know that. So I mean. Week one is going to be interesting as hell this year for sure.
Yeah, so like a sneaky stack, like a super sneaky stack, could be Rodgers and Cobb. If you do pricing based on like last year's numbers, because like Rodgers in 2015 averaged 3.75 fantasy points per game less than his average from 2008 to 2014, and then like Randall Cobb like averaged 12.7 fantasy points per game last season. But like over the 3 seasons prior, he averaged 17.25 fantasy points per game. So like that could be like super exploitable, but like it's like really hard to say anything at this point without pricing.
For sure. It's gonna be an interesting week 1, that's for sure. But I would say I think we've covered enough tonight. I think we completed our power hour.
Yeah, as Johnny burps when he's saying that. Yeah, I had a ton of fun. I'm super drunk. Shout out to like everyone who has been watching and participating on Twitter. Shout out to Christo, who's been on the pod before and like really killed it. Although like I met up with Jen Ryan the other day because she lives like the town over from me and I work with her mom. She was talking about how like when Christo was on the show, like his dad or something was like behind him, and like she got like really scared that like Christo didn't know who that was and he was gonna like slit his throat while we were podcasting. I kind of thought it was like weird and kind of funny in a dark way. But yeah, shout out to Christo who killed it when he came on for the ROI Monsters podcast. Shout out to Carl Sapchik who's been tweeting us the whole way. We've talked about him a ton. He's kind of like the third wheel of the podcast, even though he's never been invited on. Shout out to TJ Hernandez, who's been talking to us. FF_HEP, who's been talking to us a little bit. Tyler Bucher, who's like a reoccurring character on the podcast. He was on our experts MFL 10 draft. Justin Gwynn, who's been talking to us. Roto Doc, Ben Gretsch, we shouted out earlier, actually. Yeah, so thanks to everyone for coming on. Or no one came on. I'm drunk. Thanks to everyone for hitting us up on Twitter. I'm probably going to make Johnny not release this for iTunes, but we'll see. If he does, shout out to @Slapshaw on Twitter, who does our intro song. I don't know. Anything else?
Yeah, man. So, so make sure to tune into what we have to say. We're going to cover preseason DFS, regular season DFS. I mean, we're going to cover.
Yeah, that's the thing. We're a DFS show, and we've just done like 9 episodes on non-DFS topics, and we killed it. We were awesome. So just imagine how good we're going to be once we start covering DFS full time.
Yeah, just imagine how good we'll be when Scott lets me talk. Like no, honestly,
never, not going to happen.
I mean, seriously, guys. I mean, we are gonna cover preseason. Not a lot of people are covering preseason. We're gonna be going through all the beat writer reports we can find. We've both compiled big lists of beat writers that we think are reliable. That is a very hard thing to find. For hopefully week 1 of preseason, we're gonna try and get on Seth Yates, who has put together some awesome preseason articles in the past for Roto Grinders. He's really one of the only guys who's writing preseason DFS content. There's a lot of stuff you'll find on the internet, a lot of stuff you'll find on Twitter. A lot of it is really bad. Preseason DFS is difficult. You really got to do your homework. So we're going to try and put a lot of that together for you, do a lot of the research for you. So make sure to tune in. We will definitely be covering all of the preseason weeks for everybody. Scott, you got anything to put in other than that?
Yeah, preseason DFS. I made so much money last year just constantly drafting white wide receivers. And so I have a feeling that's going to be your strategy again. And white running backs, like Zach Zenner made me a ton of money. But, he was the only white running back I targeted. But, yeah. For some reason, like, white guys in preseason, like, that's their only chance. So they, like, go, like, 110% all out. I have a feeling that's going to be a recurring theme in our preseason DFS podcast. But, yeah. Definitely tune in, man. We're going to kill it. Johnny's like insanely good at DFS. He makes so much money. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. I'm not going to let Johnny put this on iTunes, but this is fun. Thanks for sending questions. Next time you do it, we'll include your Twitter handle so you feel special. But I don't know. I think that's it.
Hey, man. Find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play. We'll be there all year for DFS, all year for preseason, or I guess all 4 weeks for preseason. Hopefully we can find some time to put out an intro to the DFS season, maybe some random strategies, topics, things like that. But keep you guys posted. And until then, find me on Twitter @SuperDuperman22. Find Scott on Twitter @DudeFantasyBro. Until then, see you guys. Have a good one.